G'day guys, Jamie from Tokyo Motorsports here. Today's tune is this 2012 FT86. Customers brought it into us with Sprintech Supercharged kit on it, fitted by a different shop. It's also got a set of headers, it has a fuel pump and a set of larger port injectors, which is the minimum that you would need for a setup like this. It is also tuned on flex fuel, so that's E85 and petrol or anything in between. The install was originally done by one of the other local shops and we had it in for service a few weeks ago. Noticed that there was some audible knock that you could hear while you're driving down the road. Now that's not a good sign. So we took the time to have a little bit of a closer look at it. And what we discovered was that the ethanol sensor system was not reporting back to the ECU any ethanol content whatsoever. The car's tuned with ECU RaceRom, which allows an ethanol sensor to be fitted and report back to the ECU ethanol content. And then the tune can be adjusted to run on ethanol as well as petrol. What we found though was that the ethanol sensor kit fitted was an analog kit. So that's a 0 to 5 volt output, which is put down the rear O2 sensor input to the ECU and usually works to notify the ECU of the ethanol content. Now, this particular car had a CAN ethanol sensor kit wired up like an analog sensor kit into a RaceRom version that supports analog only. So there was no reporting of the ethanol content to the ECU. Therefore, it was just running a 0 ethanol content all the time, although the client had actually been running it on petrol and E85. So it's a bit of a mix-up. We've had to figure out what's going on, unscramble it, wire it up correctly. Now we're going to put it on the dyno to write the tune on both petrol and ethanol. All right, so we're all bolted up, ready to start tuning. I've got my sample pipe and the exhaust pipe to keep an eye on the fuel mixtures. I have my knock ears connected to the factory knock sensor input to the ECU so I can keep an eye on the knock levels. I've written a file for the car. Like I said, I've done a lot of these cars, so I have a fairly good library of base files to choose from. Now, the only difference between the earlier stuff and the latest stuff is the ECU RaceRom file. So that is now on version 13.3 and it's completely different to the earlier stuff. I've been tuning these cars since 2012 and seen every revision of the RaceRom feature files along the way. This is by far the best. It enables CAN inputs on the CAN bus. So we've got our ethanol content sensor transmitting on the CAN bus. The ECU is set up to receive it. I'm going to flash the ECU with the file that I've got. And the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that the ethanol content is coming through, is being picked up on the CAN bus. And then I'll be ready to start tuning. I would ordinarily like to run the cars up on the dyno before I start to try and get an idea of where they were before I start tuning and then after, so I can give befores and afters to the clients. But in this case, given we've got audible knock on the road, I don't think I'm going to do that because there's every chance that a jet episode might cause some additional damage to the engine. Hopefully there's none already, but you never really know. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to get straight into flashing the car and tuning it, and I'll keep you posted along the way. Over the years, I've done absolutely heaps of these. Various configurations, various supercharger kits, various pulley sizes, turbo kits, naturally aspirated, flex fuel, all sorts. So I know that the standard car on the dyno should make 120 kilowatts at the hubs. With the supercharger kit that it's got with a 75mm pulley, we will be shooting for approximately 180 kilowatts on petrol and closer to 210 on E85. That should be probably about the limit of the kit, but let's see how it goes along the way. Now, I mentioned earlier that this shouldn't be too hard. That might be underselling it a little bit. These ECUs and this type of car are quite sophisticated. There's 4 port injectors, 4 direct injectors. You need to proportion those correctly to get what you want, especially out of a flex fuel car. It is a direct injected engine, so you need to be careful about how much fuel you're delivering through the direct injectors. Unlike a port injector, you can't keep delivering fuel in a direct injector. You need to turn it off at some point to initiate the ignition sequence, and there's no way that you can keep injecting fuel while there's a burn going on. So there's that to consider. I have got this ECU set up in live tuner mode that allows me to make some live changes to it while I'm tuning. That makes things a lot faster because you don't have to keep stopping to flash the ECU every time you make a change. All right, so straight away I've got problems with this car. There appears to be belt slip, a little bit of squeaking going on. I need to fix that before I can carry on. I've also run into an issue with cam timing on this car. Some of these ROM IDs have an issue whereby you flash the ECU and the VVT cams won't come back on unless you drive it around the block for 8 to 10 kilometers. Now, obviously you don't want to do that every time you flash the ECU, otherwise it would probably take you weeks to tune a single car. So there is a fix for it in some of the ROMs. Luckily, this has got that fix in it, so I've sorted that out. And that has gotten me my 80 Newton meters of torque back, which is what was missing from not having the VVT cams working. So it just goes to show how effective the VVT system is on these cars. Okay, so I'm starting to run into some software issues. The problem that I've got is that the short-term fuel trims have stopped working. Now, I must have made a change somewhere in the ECU that's not doing exactly what it's supposed to. The software isn't absolutely 100% sometimes, and there are glitches and bugs in it. Now, it's just a question of going back and finding what I've changed and try and figure out what it is that's going on in the background there that's causing my problem. After a fair bit of digging around, I've discovered what's wrong with the closed loop fueling and fuel trims. For whatever reason, this flex fuel main fuel map is interfering with the system. Any number of changes around the idling point there that are different to the main fuel map on the petrol side, even though it's not running any ethanol, for some reason causes the closed loop fueling to turn off. So it took a bit of finding. I've now solved it. I know what's going on. I can work around it. I can get on with the tune. Okay, so now I've got my base file written, and I'm happy that the car is starting and running nicely on petrol. I want to do some additional mechanical checks. Now, let's not forget that a car is 99% a mechanical device, and the whole thing needs to be absolutely perfect to make sure that your tune is spot on. Now, the things I'm looking for are going to be fuel pressures, air leaks, boost leaks, things like that. Those are the sorts of things that it is possible to tune around, but you definitely don't want to be doing that. The problem with that is that if you do tune around a mechanical problem, for example, air leak or boost leak, those problems can continue to get worse, and as they do, your tune will go out. The flip side of that is, if at some point those problems get identified and repaired, also your tune is out. So we want to make sure all those things are ticked off before we get right into the tune. So I have fuel pressure gauge installed, I've checked it down for air leaks, I want to make sure it's 100% right. So one of the checks I like to do on these engines as part of the tuning process is to make sure that the main tank pump is delivering enough pressure. These 86s want to run 4 bar of static pressure, which means it does not go up and down with manifold pressure, it's fixed. Therefore it's fairly easy to measure it. So I've got on my master gauge here, I've got just over 4 bar fuel pressure, which is perfect. I'll leave this gauge on the car, so while I'm running it up to full power, I can keep an eye on that pressure, make sure it's not dropping off under full load. So I'm done with my petrol tune. I'm happy with the 180 kilowatts that I'm getting. The next step is to move across on the E85. Now that involves draining out the remaining petrol from the tank, and given the fact that it's a dead end type system, it really comes down to just bleeding a little bit of pressure off the system into a drum while maintaining enough pressure to run the system. So my fuel swap is now underway. I have drained out all of the petrol from the tank. It is a tank with 2 sides over the tow shaft. And so you can pump out one side, but if the siphon's not active, it won't pump out the other side. So I've had to maintain enough fuel pressure in the front of the car at the rail to make sure that the fuel reg and siphon is working inside the tank to siphon the fuel from the other side of the tank. And that's the side that the petrol goes in, or the E85 goes in. So the E85 is now being picked up, ethanol numbers are coming up, and I'm going to keep my eye on the tune, make sure that the fuel trims aren't all over the place, giving me an idea that my petrol ethanol ratio tables are in the right spot. Alright, so we're back in business. I've done my fuel swap, we're on E82, I've sorted out my software bug, I have got my ethanol content multipliers all spot on, fuel trims are right where they should be. The only thing remaining is to send it on E85, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm pretty much done on the dyno now. Power figures just shy of 220 kilowatts compared to 180 kilowatts on petrol. Timing is where I want it, fueling is where I want it. I've got my fuel pressure gauge, I've checked that at full power. make sure that the tank pump isn't rolling over, which it isn't. It's holding a steady 4 bar, which I'm happy with. So next step will be off the dyno, onto the road, make sure it drives nice, and then very last is cold start testing tomorrow morning to make sure it starts in the cold weather, which can be a little bit tricky with ethanol, but there's plenty of adjustability in the ECU, so I should be able to get it right. So we're just out on the road test. We are trying to calibrate the auto blip, the burble, launch control and flat foot shifting to make sure all those features are calibrated nicely. And the only way to do it is on the road, so that's what we're doing. All right, so the first thing we're going to test is the auto blip on down change. So over 60 kilometers an hour, on the brakes, on the clutch switch, and it'll blip. Just like that. So the next thing that we've calibrated is the burble. So just got to be on the overrun basically. We've calibrated it all, so just got to gas it and lift. And the flat foot shifting. All right, so last but by no means least, the launch control. So that's in gear, handbrake off, foot on the clutch, stationary, and just floor it. All right, so that's it. Tune's done on petrol, ethanol, road test is completed, done all the special features set up, got a cold start test it in the morning. Other than that, she's good to go. The whole thing has taken 10 hours, so there's a fair bit in one of these tunes if you want to get it right.